Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Sharon Van Sickle-Robbins, president of the club, and I would like to welcome you all, those of you here with us today at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Thank you for joining City Club on this Friday, December 17th, for the final Friday Forum of 2010. In consideration of those sitting close to you and those in our radio and television audiences, can you all please make sure your cell phones are turned off? Today we will hear from Mercy Corps CEO Neal Keny-Guyer about many things, including how young people are building or rebuilding their communities in some of the world's toughest countries. But first, a few announcements. I'd like to start by recognizing some of our new City Club members. Patricia Kearns and Tim Durant, who's a doctoral candidate at the University of Oregon's Political Science Department. If you'll please stand, we'd like to welcome you. I'd also like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. And I'd like to offer our appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors whose generous financial support makes these City Club luncheons possible. We're extremely pleased to have as winter quarter sponsors Stoll Reeves, The Standard, and West Coast Bank. Please join me in offering them our appreciation. They don't have to be alone. If your company or firm would like to be a City Club sponsor, please contact City Club staff at the back of the room or call the City Club offices. City Club is currently seeking volunteers for a new study committee charged with exploring alternatives to Oregon's current system for redrawing legislative districts, which is sure to be a hot topic this coming year. Information about this upcoming research study, including how you can apply, can be found at the back of the room. The club's research and policy director, Tony Yacarino, will also be available at the back of the room to answer any questions you might have. Also, City Club's annual fund is in full swing. Donations to the annual fund play a significant role in supporting the club's civic engagement efforts and are critical to the life of the club. If you've already given to the annual fund this year, please rise and let us thank you. And I know there are some of you who have. Annual fund donations help support Friday forums, including our election season debates, addresses by political leaders, and forums on topics ranging from ecology to economics. If you've enjoyed this past season of Friday Forums, please support their continuation. You don't need to be a City Club member. Donation envelopes are on the tables, and City Club staff in the back of the room would be happy to accept your check or credit card contributions. You can also give directly on the club's website at www.pdxcityclub.org. And as a special incentive from our friends at Davis Hibbets Midge Hall Public Opinion Research, if you give before December 31st, they will provide a $20 match for every contribution. So thank you for supporting City Club. And now to today's program. In the most volatile corners of the globe, residents struggle with poverty, hunger, conflict, and natural disaster. Often these tragedies hit young people the hardest. Non-governmental organizations can provide assistance and relief in part by helping young people use their own energy and ideas to improve their lives and strengthen their communities. Today, Mercy Corps CEO Neal Keny-Guyer will talk about his perspectives that he's gained over many, many, many years of working in this area. And also we'll talk about how fostering economic opportunity for young adults can help to heal broken communities. Neal Keny-Guyer holds a BA in Public Policy and Religion from Duke University, an MA in Public and Private Management from Yale University, and an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from Portland State University. He began his career with Communities in Schools in 1976, working with at-risk youth in the inner cities of Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, Georgia. He then moved to Thailand in 1980 to focus on Cambodia's refugees and war victims for CARE UNICEF. In 1982, he began his tenure with Save the Children. After a 4-year stint at his toughest job, stay-at-home dad, he joined Mercy Corps in 1994 as CEO. Under his leadership, Mercy Corps has emerged as a leading international humanitarian and development organization with ongoing operations in nearly 40 countries, a staff of 3,700, and an annual operating budget of $308 million. So please help me welcome Mercy Corps CEO Neal Keny-Guyer.
Sharon, thank you for that kind introduction. Although I have to say, with the arrangement up here, I kind of feel like the thorn between the roses. I also have to say that I'm particularly glad that my bride is here today because, as all of you know, here in Portland, I'm not so much known as the CEO of Mercy Corps, but as the husband of Alyssa. And I'm very proud of that, and that's fitting because today is our anniversary, our 21st anniversary. And I also have to add is, you know, as much as anyone that I know, she embraces through her own work at Oregon Solutions, the City Club's ethos of collaborative community engagement. So, honey, I love you. So good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted, I'm honored to be back at the City Club, Portland's preeminent forum for civic engagement. And I want to start by thanking all of you who are here today and all of you who are listening wherever for all that you do, because I know that so many of you do so much to make our community, our state, our country, and our world a better place. So I want to start with thanking you. I also, with that in mind, have one advertisement, and I hope Sharon won't mind. And that one advertisement is, you know, if you haven't renewed your membership to City Club, do it now, do it today, because it is very, very important. I also have to say that I know there are so many supporters of Mercy Corps here in this room and listening, and I can't tell you how much hometown support means to us. We are the envy of so many of our colleague organizations around this country because of the level of support that we get right here in Portland. And I want to invite all of you, if you haven't come down to visit our new headquarters, or you haven't been to the Mercy Corps Action Center run by Julie Mancini, who's here, and her incredible team, then please come on down, particularly during the holidays. She and her team have provided an extraordinary array of educational and civic engagement opportunities. Before I get to the main points of my talk, I would like to just give a quick overview of Mercy Corps, not so much as an advertisement, well, maybe as a small bit of promotion, but I thought it would be good to sort of refresh people's memory of sort of who we are and what our distinctives are as an organization. And then after that, what I really want to do is reflect together on 8 lessons that I feel that I've learned as the CEO of an international relief and development organization, the kind of lessons that I think are so important for anyone in the social change world who's looking to get real success and real impact. As Sharon said, Mercy Corps was founded almost 30 years ago in response to the killing fields of Cambodia. And now we've grown into a global humanitarian organization that works in 40 countries with an annual budget, and Sharon mentioned over $300 million, but if you actually add in our microfinance programs, it's a little bit over $600 million. A global team now with some expansion recently in both Pakistan and Afghanistan of 4,000. I think, as you all know, and you've made it possible, so many of you, we work in some of the world's toughest places: Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Haiti, Iraq, and North Korea, the so-called fragile and failing states. Wherever natural disaster, political crisis and conflict, or economic collapse happen, we aim to be among the world's best at mobilizing those communities impacted for their own relief and recovery, undergirding their efforts with economic development and social innovation, and laying foundations for long-term development and peace. And again, as many of you know, we also work in the U.S. and right here in the greater Portland area. And I would be remiss not to note the excellent work of John Haynes and his wonderful Mercy Corps Northwest team. Also, as many of you can imagine, one of the things that I do every morning is check and see if any of our frontline workers, or frankly the frontline workers of many of our colleague organizations, if any of them have been injured. And I just want to take a moment here with all of you to kind of recognize and reflect on those folks, because they're at the heart of the mission. They're where the work really matters, on the front lines in the most dangerous countries. As some of you know, in the course of Mercy Corps' history, we've had about 10 people killed in the line of duty as a result of violence. And many of you are aware of the tragedy we had just this past year in Pakistan, in which 4 of our national team members in Pakistan were kidnapped, and we only got 3 of them back home safely. In fact, 1 was brutally executed. And just sharing that, because not only do your financial support mean so much, but perhaps even more, you know, your support, your moral support to our spirit, to our organization, and to our mission means an incredible lot as well. Now, what I'd like to do is sort of reflect on 8 lessons learned that I think are really important for getting impact and making a real difference in our world. I've been doing humanitarian relief and development work for most of my adult life. Some said maybe too long. I think some people in my family still wonder if I'm going to grow up and get a real job. But I'm blessed with a great job. So let me share these lessons. And these are the lessons that are animating the work of Mercy Corps. Number 1, focus on the bottom billion. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. The economist Paul Collier coined this term. By the way, I highly recommend his book called The Bottom Billion. You see, for too long, the aid community has talked about ending poverty in the developing world, making the developing world like the developed world. The fact of the matter is that much of the developing world is advancing, though not always equally, and not without vulnerabilities and some challenges, but still progress is happening, largely in so many areas due to globalization and decent governance. Look at India, China, Brazil, and there we obviously see huge progress. However, there remains, despite globalization and all the aid efforts, about 1 billion people left profoundly behind in countries that are often falling apart. These people are not simply poor, they're trapped by constant conflict, poor governance, and lack of rule of law, in addition to extreme poverty. Traditional aid interventions have had only marginal impact in improving their plight. So instead of a shotgun, scattershot approach to aid, we need to focus on the bottom billion in about 50 countries, 2/3 of which reside in Africa. I really believe we won't end poverty in our lifetimes if we don't have a more laser-like focus on the bottom billion. Here's some startling statistics. In places where the bottom billion live, life expectancy is 50 years. In the rest of the developing world, not the developed world, in the rest of the developing world, it is 68. Child mortality is 15% where the bottom billion live. In the rest of the developing world, it is 4%. Children's malnutrition is 36%. In the rest of the developing world, it is 20%. Among the bottom billion countries, economic growth has stagnated or declined over the past 25 years. In the rest of the developing world, it has averaged 4% growth, and we know about the growth rates in China and Brazil. So we have to focus on the bottom billion if we're to create a more peaceful, stable, and just world. We have to focus on the fragile and failing states, and that's where Mercy Corps works. Second lesson, view crisis as opportunity. A Chinese proverb says that crisis is opportunity riding a dangerous wind, or the tail of a dragon. That's a way of framing Mercy Corps' worldview. We have found that during times of conflict, natural disaster, or economic collapse, that crisis is an opening for positive change. Old systems are disrupted, old assumptions are challenged, old solutions are judged insufficient. It gives us the chance to build back better. We've seen in our 30 years of doing humanitarian relief and development work around the world that where there is disaster, turmoil, and collapse, there are always incredible opportunities for positive change. At that very intersection of extreme poverty, fragile or failing states, and conflict or disaster, that's where Mercy Corps and so many other organizations are able to add the greatest value as international organizations. Let's take Haiti, which I know is still vivid and fresh in our minds, almost 1 year after the devastating earthquake of January 12th. I went there on about day 5 after the earthquake. I cannot forget what I saw. In my 30 years of witnessing humanitarian crises, I've seen none worse nor more challenging for the international community than Haiti. You had so many of the frontline workers who were killed in the earthquake. There were 17 government buildings that collapsed. The headquarters of the United Nations collapsed, taking with it so many of their best and brightest and most able. It was such a devastating situation. But in Haiti, the reason it was so devastating was because of the challenges that existed before the earthquake, and frankly, for the lack of the rule of law that enforced earthquake codes. They had earthquake codes, they just were not enforced. Haiti was already so poor before the earthquake. 55% of the people lived in extreme poverty, on less than $1.25 a day. 50% of the children were malnourished. 50% of the people had no access to clean water. Now there are 200,000 dead, over 1 million people displaced, and billions of dollars in damages. And now there's cholera. So you can't talk about any kind of silver lining when so many thousands of fathers, mothers, and children died. But if there is redemption to be found in such a tragedy, it is perhaps in the global will, the resources, and the attention that have been mobilized. Because if these are sustained wisely, there truly could be an opportunity to address the root causes of Haiti's poverty and suffering. That is the redemption. Yet we have to get it right in our principles and in our approach, which leads me to the third lesson. Put people first. Now, doesn't that seem obvious? Put people first. But in our world, many people seem to start with strategies hatched somewhere else. They start with technical solutions, and you have to start with people. If there's a truth in our work, it's this. In every crisis or disaster, the people most affected are always the best agents of their own recovery. So from day one, we need to be consulting them, getting their ideas, engaging them directly in relief and recovery, and connecting them to markets and to government. I'll give you a quick example. During the tsunami, and again, many of you were so generous in your support, and particularly in Aceh, Indonesia, there were so many people who were displaced from their homes. But these people didn't want to sit idle in displacement camps. They wanted to be engaged in their own recovery. Mercy Corps and other organizations came up with a program called Cash for Work. Let's pay people a minimum wage to clean up rubble, to open up roads, to open up health and other social welfare infrastructure, so that, number one, they have their dignity. They feel like that they're part of the solution and not sitting around waiting for an aid organization. So number two, they have money that they can take care of their families with. They can get it back into the local private sector. And we know that early market recovery, early local market recovery is so critical for the overall health and speed of the recovery in general. So those are the kind of programs that engage people as agents of their own recovery. Fourth lesson, while putting people first, we need to focus on youth. But at the same time, we need to consider the demographic youth bulge. And here, I'm not talking about waste lines, which sometimes is an issue in our country with youth, but I'm talking about the potential for wasted lives, as well as the need for all of us to provide positive pathways for our youth. Half the world's population is under 25. In the Middle East, 65% of the population is under 30. Young people are the largest demographic group in some of the poorest, most unstable, and conflict-ridden places on Earth. Over the next decade, over 1 billion young people will enter the global labor market, but less than a third of them are likely to find jobs, according to labor economists. The highest youth unemployment and underemployment will be in North Africa and the Middle East, with obvious security implications for us all. Now, many of these young people feel marginalized in their own communities. They're not included in local or national decision-making, so they feel powerless and isolated to affect change. This is especially true for girls and young women. Without opportunities, without connections to their own communities, without optimism for their own futures, these young people, particularly in these environments, can become very susceptible. They are vulnerable to the influences of radicalism and coercive political movements. They're vulnerable to risky behaviors, crime, and corruption. They may leave home to follow a dubious cause. We see this all over the world. Somali pirates, child soldiers in Colombia, Sri Lanka, and Uganda, many of them recruited as young as 10 years old. Sex trafficking throughout Asia and the Pacific, and even here in the U.S. We see young people falling prey to all kinds of dangers. We see it on 82nd Avenue here in Portland and up and down the I-5 corridor. And we see it in Pioneer Square, Portland's own living room, where apparently a disaffected young Somali man, a kid who was raised here but who may have latched on to dangerous ideologies, allegedly nearly took out his rage and hopelessness by causing great harm to others. These young people, all of them, are our collective future. Now, at the same time, and I know you're going to ask questions about this, there are lots of wonderful young people who are eager to make a positive difference in their communities, to grow up healthy, to be able to support and protect their families, to connect to a world larger than themselves, and to see that their futures are bright, their lives have meaning. And this leads me to the fifth lesson. Find and support the heroes, the bright lights, especially among our youth. You know, one of the great blessings of my work is to meet the most extraordinary individuals who, having suffered greatly, who may have lost loved ones, continue to act with amazing grace, integrity, vision, and courage. They are the best change agents. They are the positive forces for transformation. Reminds me of a story that I heard from a commencement speaker this year. He commented, you know, there's always the question of how did life begin? How did life begin? And scientists are now saying it's apparently fairly simple. In that great primordial soup, the positive forces outweighed the negative forces. The positive forces outweighed the negative forces. And you know, if that's not even totally true, isn't that a great paradigm for how we should all be living our lives? The positive forces outweigh the negative forces. You see, no one remembers the naysayers of our world. That's why it's so important to focus on these heroes, the bright lights. I was recently in Gaza, and that reminds me of the story of a young man that I met there just after the Israel and Hamas conflict. Mercy Corps has been working with young people in Gaza. In fact, at one point, we had more than 1,200 young people doing community service throughout the Gaza Strip. It had never happened before. Many of these young people were connected by video conferencing with high school kids right here in Portland, Oregon, exchanging stories about what it means to grow up in their respective environments. But there was this young man named Ahmed. I'll never forget this. And I went in to Gaza just after the conflict ended. I was probably one of the first people allowed in. And there, were journalists at the time. And I remember a TV crew, of course, looking for that controversial story. And they were there with Ahmed, one of our kids. And they said, Ahmed, listen, after all the violence that's happened, doesn't this make you want to take up the gun? Ahmed pauses for a minute. And he goes, yes. Camera leans in closer. The gun of knowledge. The gun of knowledge. I'm not sure that was quite the story they were looking for, but it brought tears to my eyes, I'll tell you that. Support the bright lights, and they're everywhere. Sixth lesson is we need to catalyze partnerships between civil society, the private sector, and government. In my view, these partnerships are the foundation on which all lasting positive social change rests, whether here locally, nationally, or frankly, anywhere in the world. In fact, Mercy Corps' vision for change is that peaceful, secure, just societies emerge when the private, public, and civil society sectors are able to interact with accountability, inclusive participation, and mechanisms for peaceful change. You know, when you get that mix and timing right, progress can be sustained. Nothing can hold you back. The mix may vary from country to country, but there's no replacement formula for community-led, market-driven, policy-based solutions if social change is to scale with positive, lasting impact. Lesson 7, promote social innovation. This may be the most important to me. This is absolutely critical, and it's often the most missing ingredient in many social change or service organizations. Let's be honest with ourselves. No single organization can solve the big social challenges we face, locally and certainly not globally. Even if all the non-governmental organizations, the private voluntary organizations, the community-based organizations join hands, which would be a great thing. We all should join hands, and many times we do, but we would still fall short. That's why, in my view, the role of international non-governmental organizations like Mercy Corps is to be the social entrepreneurs, the social innovators in the world. We are charged with bringing entrepreneurial ideas, creative partnerships, and different approaches to traditional problems and challenges. And here, I'm really proud of my organization, Mercy Corps, because I don't know of any other large mainstream relief and development organization who has more positioned in the social innovation space than has Mercy Corps. You see, traditional approaches to social progress and building a better world, the ones based on charity, on old forms of philanthropy, are inadequate to solve the world's toughest problems. Traditional approaches, while worthy and important, have not achieved the results, the impacts, the scale needed to meet the most pressing problems today: eliminating absolute poverty, providing health care for all and clean water for all, tackling global warming and climate change. Even more significantly, traditional approaches have not surfaced and sustained innovative solutions and entrepreneurial strategies to solving social problems. You know, I really believe that there's a new era for social change and progress emerging. It gets labeled as a new paradigm, new philanthropy, a new partnership between business and society. Bill Gates talks about creative capitalism, and Muhammad Yunus, the father of microenterprise and Nobel Peace Prize winner, calls for an era of social enterprises. Whatever we call this new era, and it kind of reminds me of the old song of the 60s, right? Something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear, but whatever we call this new era, it's all about bringing the power of innovation and entrepreneurship, the key drivers of success in the market sector, to target the neglected, the disadvantaged, and the suffering segments of our society. It's all about social entrepreneurs who look at the enormous challenges before us as opportunities to leverage the power of markets and business to have transformative, system-wide impacts. Let me give you just one quick example. Again, it's drawn from the Mercy Corps world. I think, as many of you know, we bought a bank in Haiti. And the reason we bought a bank is not because we wanted to own a bank. We bought a bank in Indonesia. And it was not because we wanted to own a bank. It was because we wanted to transform the microfinance industry in Indonesia. Microfinance has been retail-led. You all have all heard of Grameen Bank, of Axion, and some of the big, but it's retail-led. And one of the challenges is rarely have we focused on the whole ecosystem of microfinance. What was missing in Indonesia, which is the world's largest microfinance market, was a wholesale bank that would connect all of the retail players with a technology platform over which you could introduce new products and services at scale, cost effectively. Things like micro insurance, things like mobile banking, things like banking through the cell phone, which many of you have read about. And so that is what we have been aiming to do in Indonesia. The Gates Foundation gave us about $20 million, part of which was our equity, to join with other equity investors in order to try to think holistically and strategically about a whole sector. And if we get that right, that will really add knowledge and value for all of microfinance throughout the world. And that's why, in my view, social innovation is so important, is so terribly important. And it also then leads to the 8th lesson. And that is that we need to leverage the humanitarian bridge to support peaceful change and human rights. And one illustration I'd like to share with you, and I'm particularly reminded of this illustration as I look at Shota Zono, is the example of North Korea. Many people have said, why do you work in North Korea? And I have to say, yes, it was because when we started there, there was a famine in which maybe 2 million people died. 2 million people out of a population of 20 million people. That's important. That's the humanitarian bridge. But beyond that, we felt it was important to also be concerned about, can we help, and not to be Pollyannish, but can we help provide a pathway that enables North Korea to join the family of nations in a peaceful, stable way. And there have been good folks from Portland here who have made that possible. There's been good partnerships with Oregon State that have enabled us to bring representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture from North Korea to here to study fish farming, other modern techniques of agriculture. But the real reason is because we wanted to try to provide a way to leverage the humanitarian bridge on behalf of peace. And I'll never forget when Madeleine Albright said to me, and this was a number of years ago, right after she had left office as Secretary of State. She says, you know, Neal, I know Mercy Corps does wonderful work, but I got to tell you, the courage and the way you stepped up in North Korea was really, really commendable. We were this close to an agreement. And, of course, it didn't happen. And maybe it wouldn't have happened, that we see how things have evolved. She said, but we were this close to an agreement. And the reason we were this close, that's a short space for those of you listening in. The reason we are this close is because of the work that you did, you and other organizations, at building relationships, creating more positive space for the diplomats and the ambassadors to do their work. And so you see, we believe it's not only important to be angels of mercy, but it's also important for all of us to be ambassadors for peace. Those are the lessons. For me, there are lessons that apply not only to Mercy Corps, but to so many organizations who are trying to bring about lasting positive change at scale in our world. Now, in closing, and I know that someone once said that the two most welcome words in any speech are in closing, but if you'll just indulge me for a moment longer. You know, sometimes the challenges before us can seem daunting, sometimes beyond our capacities and our reach to make a difference. And that reminds me of a very familiar story, and you all know it well, but it's worth repeating. It's the story of the old man and the young apprentice walking on the shoreline. A storm had washed up hundreds of starfish exposed to the sun and likely to die. The old man reached down and picked up one starfish and tossed it back into the sea. The young apprentice said, "Why did you do that? That won't make any difference." And the old man replied, "It just did. It just did." So I would urge all of us, particularly at this season, but throughout the year, each in our own way, to reach for a starfish and make a difference. For all of us, pick one, pick two great local organizations, and there's some wonderful organizations in our community. Stand for Children, there's many of them. Get involved in with your resources, get involved in with your brains, get involved with your energy and your talents, because it matters. And if I may say, pick one international organization, and there's many great ones in our home community here as well as elsewhere, but the important thing is choose your starfish, get involved, because you can make a difference. You know, there is always, and many of you have heard me say this before, I really do believe that there is a seamless web that connects a homeless youth in our own community with a hungry child abroad. You know, Albert Schweitzer said, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but I do know that the only ones among you who will find true happiness are those who have sought and found how to serve." And he means to serve others. That's worth repeating. I don't know what your destiny will be, but I do know that the only ones among you who will find true happiness are those who have sought and found how to serve. You know, there's an African proverb, one that transcends borders and boundaries, ideologies and philosophies. It reaches around the world, and it reaches into this room right now, and it goes like this. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is now. So let's all get planting. Thank you very much.
The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host. And our host today is City Club Governor Melody Rose. Melody is Vice Provost for Academic Programs and Instruction at Portland State University. She's also the founder and director of the Center for Women, Politics, and Policy. She joined City Club in 2004, is a former chair of the Friday Forum Committee, and is now president-elect of City Club. So you'll be seeing her on the stage quite often beginning in June. Melody?
Thank you so much, Neal, for being a real bright spot in a very difficult time in our world history. I think most in our audience, both present and listening, are relatively familiar with Mercy Corps' efforts to inspire youth engagement around the globe in a whole variety of hotspots. But your headquarters are here in Portland. And I'm curious to hear, especially for the youth in the audience here today, what role does Mercy Corps see itself playing in encouraging more of our local youth to take up the gun of knowledge and engage themselves in more civic engagement?
Melody, that's a great question. Thank you. Let me start by saying that one of my favorite programs are those that are associated with the Mercy Corps Action Center. And those of you who have visited, and now it's somewhere 25,000 plus people have come, since it's been open, have gone through. The vast majority of those people have been young folks, middle school and high school kids who have come there and through a hands-on interactive experience, think kind of like OMSI, but through a hands-on interactive experience are learning about the root causes of hunger, poverty, and injustice, learning about things of the role of women and the value of women's empowerment in any development, learning about local governance, good governance, and why that's so critically important, looking about how conflict so retards development. But not only that, not only do they learn about it, but then they get to engage on making a difference. And at the Action Center, it sort of starts with a timeline that says if you have 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 year, 1 lifetime, here are the many things that you can do to make a difference. Not at home, and there's a linkage to many local organizations that young people have used to connect with. And of course, there's things you can do by connecting with international organizations, with human rights organizations, with civil society organizations, or things that you can do with legislation that is really important in order to promote, for example, fair trade and so forth. So that's number one. Number two, for young folks perhaps who are coming out of university or graduate school, certainly with Mercy Corps Northwest, there's volunteer opportunities. We are proud. I love it because most of the interns sit on the same floor where I sit, which gives it kind of a special energy there, which is great. So there are opportunities, for internships. But I can't miss the opportunity to encourage young people to recognize that we live in such an amazingly fast-changing world. I say this to my own kids. Of course, it doesn't get me very much, but I try, which is that, compared to when I was their age, and there are many people in this room who I think we're similar vintages, there are now 1 billion more young people who have incredible skills, who have language abilities, who see the world as their oyster. So number one, just for us to be competitive, our young people are going to have to know the world way better than they ever did before. And number two, that they will learn so much in today's world because so many of the best ideas, the best resources, and a lot of the talent is happening in these emerging countries that we're all aware of. And the final thing that I would say for folks is I know there are many career choices that young people can make. I continue to hope and want that among our best and brightest that they will choose social change work, helping the disadvantaged, international work as a real calling because you can make a difference and we need their talents now as much as ever before.
We will now take questions from the floor. Asking questions at Friday Forums is a privilege of City Club membership. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. If I flash my question mark sign, it means you haven't gotten to the question, and we hope you do so quickly. And if you haven't asked questions before, you stand over here at this microphone to my left, and we'll get to you. Thank you.
Kurt Webering, member. I've done some work internationally for the United Nations on squatter housing, and fortunately the country I was in was fairly clean. It was Malaysia. But I know in other countries, corruption is a part of what goes on in terms of how governments govern and don't govern, and where money goes. And I wonder how Mercy Corps deals with that problem.
Thank you, Kurt. You know, I'm often asked about the challenges of corruption, you know, especially in the countries that we work in. In fact, we did our own study of corruption in Afghanistan. It was really interesting and documented how much was lost to ordinary farmers because of the bribes that they often have to pay in getting their products to the markets. And if you could just clean that up, you might do as much in terms of putting more income into the pockets of small farmers and poor farmers as any of the aid programs. So it's a real challenge. You know, first, what I would say is, you know, at least to my knowledge, we've never paid a bribe. We think that's a slippery slope. Once you walk down that pathway, you know, you're in trouble. Number two, a technique that we have used in many places around the world is sort of a community bulletin board. There are versions of it, as we know, as part of good governance here in this country, but that is putting a bulletin board in communities that show the exact resources that are being brought in, who is getting those resources, and under what terms and conditions. We find it does wonders to kind of engage local government in that way, as well as to restrain perhaps some of their less desirable instincts in places. And then number three, we have a number of programs that are focused on good governance, that are at the heart of what we do, that really empower civil society groups to work with local governments around issues of transparency, of openness, and so forth. In so many cases, once you can create more equal power relationships and shine light onto transactions, that does a whole host of good in terms of reducing corruption. I also would say, I'm looking at Rich Reed, and I would have to say that, you know, what's also important is to support the development of a local press and of local organizations whose mission is really dedicated, you know, to transparency, to accountability, and to openness, because that's absolutely, absolutely critical. We will not get the change that we all believe in and want to see in our world if we can't make better progress against corruption and bad governance. It's absolutely critical.
John Leeper, City Club member. Sir, I want to commend you and your whole organization for the most outstanding work that you do worldwide. My question for you is very closely related to the earlier one. I have read articles fairly recently about the problems related to NGOs and their affiliation or close relationship with many of the governments in the countries in which you work. What is your take really on the appropriateness of closeness to those governments, some of which are somewhat less than honest?
John, thank you for your kind words, and we feel very blessed that we're part of a great community of organizations doing wonderful, wonderful work. With respect to the question of relationships with local governments, particularly those local governments that many of us, you know, might find a bit distasteful and so forth, you know, the first thing that I would say is that as a non-governmental organization, for all of us, I think it's very important that we be impartial and non-political. And independent. That's kind of the hallmark, I think, of what it means to be a non-governmental organization. Number two, I think there's always a real fine line in terms of your relationships with governments. Take, for example, a relationship in Sudan. You know, you can't operate in Sudan if you don't have some legal agreement with the government. Right? We all know that. For example, one's operations in Zimbabwe. You have a joint government, right? You have the Mugabe political party on the one hand, the Morgan Tsvangirai political party on the other hand. They have chosen to come together in order to try to provide some stability for Zimbabwe. I might have, and many of us in the NGO world might have various personal views about these governments. But what's most important for us is to find ways to operate that produce lasting change, where there's real impact. And sometimes that means you carve a little bit more independent path. Some places government doesn't work at all, but in other cases you want to try to find ways to appeal to the bright lights in any government. And I've yet to see a government that is so thoroughly evil that every single person is evil in it. And so it represents opportunities to move those forces who want to see positive change forward. But it's very, very delicate. It is, I think, more of an art form than it is a science. But at the end of the day, we have to find ways to try to make governments work and serve the interests of their people. We all know that. Without that, any of the work that we do cannot be sustained. We know that. We have to find ways when communities are in conflict, or when they have ethnic divides, religious divides, racial divides, tribal divides, that there are pathways that give people positive incentives to see a common future together. That's the value that we can bring. So there's going to be no one formula, no one way that fits all of those situations, which is why you have to have your eyes wide open. You have to be as smart and as thoughtful as you can be, and you have to stay focused on measures of accountability and impact for the people for whom you exist. But a great question.
I'm Carla Kelly. I'm a City Club member. My question is about the people who do your work. What are you looking for when you select them? What are the most important things? And what are the most important things that you do to train them?
That's another great question. Thank you. I feel like answering a little bit how Southwest Airlines used to answer, is that, the most important characteristic is a great attitude. You hire for attitude because we can train almost everything else. And there's some truth to that, in the sense that I think what often makes the difference between someone in our world who succeeds and someone who doesn't, is their ability to really embrace and work with and know how to deal with other cultures and with real diversity. And that often represents a great attitude and spirit, number one. Number two, someone who's entrepreneurial by nature, as I talked about. We want people who are inclined to want to take risk, who dream big, who think in bold kind of ways, and yet perhaps undergirded with a practical sense of what can get done. Number three, it's so important that anyone who joins an organization like Mercy Corps can work collaboratively, can work in teams. We work so often in teams, and often these teams represent quite a bit of diversity. Then we can often bring some of the other technical skills that are required. It is, obviously, in some of our work, you need to be an agriculturalist. You need to be familiar with microenterprise, or perhaps have an MBA if you're dealing in economic development projects and understand that. But there are many people who have those kind of degrees and skills. We find that the hardest is really the attitude. And I will say, I think, again, unlike the private sector who has the Center for Creative Leadership and has all these programs designed to build up the kind of management skills and collaborative skills of their workforce, the nonprofit sector in general has taken that for granted, has underinvested in it. We need to do more in that space. I think Mercy Corps has been among the leaders in that space, but there's so much more we all need to do. It is a great chance, though, to call out something, which is to say thank you. We have a collaborative effort here with Portland State, and Portland State faculty and their business school have been working with us to do kind of a project management courses around the world aimed at our best and brightest national staff, who we see is really on a fast track. And it's been fantastic. They've gone to various parts of the world, and it's kind of like an MBA project management course in a box, and it's great to have that kind of collaboration.
Good afternoon, Neal. My name is Patrick Christian. I'm a City Club member. I just wanted to let you know I first started working with your organization in a little town called Zelinji, just west of Jebel Mara. And since then, I've worked in and around Mercy Corps folks in Yemen, Ethiopia, Sudan, Colombia, and a few other places. I work actually in the government in policy. And the question is where NGOs interface with governmental and intergovernmental organizations. And two vexing questions have always been the ability to rely upon NGOs as an effective means of track two diplomacy, as well as replacing the endless coordination with real, honest-to-goodness interplay, intercooperation between government plans, intergovernmental plans, and then the fine work of the NGOs. Would you care to comment on how what the future of that is?
Another great question. I thought if I chose December 17th, I might get some softballs, but that's obviously not the case at the City Club. What I would say on that again is it's an art form. I believe strongly, and as you all know, Mercy Corps has positioned itself as the kind of organization that really believes in creating more positive political space in those regions of conflict so that diplomats and others can do their work. And the reason we've done that is because we've seen the impact of violence and conflict on ordinary citizens. We've seen time and time again, when you don't pay enough attention to that, you can rebuild houses, you can rebuild health clinics and schools, you can help jumpstart the economy, and it all comes down just like that overnight when communities go back to conflict, which is why, in our view, it's been so important to try to find ways to do our programs in a way that help truly support peace. And I know that in some cases, we've been accused of kind of crossing the lines. People have said, why are you working in North Korea? And it's because we have seen the horrors of violence, and I feel very emotional about that, because I've lived in Beirut, I've seen it so many places, I've held children with holes in their heads from bullets, and those have kind of been seared in me. So I feel we have to get into that mushy gray space where you are working to lay the foundations for long-term peace. I would also say that it also gives me the opportunity to say we also live in a changing world. And one of the things that we and others are trying to do and believe is very important is in the global humanitarian system to make room for these emerging powers. I think it's critically important that we find ways, in a positive sense, to bring China in more, to bring India in more, to bring Brazil in more. In many places where we work, if we could find a way to help China invest its billions in Africa in a more developmental sense, in a way that supports the bottom billion, that might be as much good work as we could do with our own aid programs directly. And we're reaching out and doing that. Paul Dudley Hart is here, is kind of charged with finding that pathway for us. I also felt in a lot of ways the United States missed an opportunity when we were appointing a new director of UNICEF. By tradition, the head of UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Organization, has always been an American. I thought it would have been kind of magnanimous, particularly with this administration, to have gone to China or India and have offered that spot as part of our need to change the global humanitarian world to one of those countries. But that's an excellent question. Thank you.
Britt Conroy, new City Club member. Thanks for being here today. Just a quick personal note, nearly 10 years ago, I was able to intern with Mercy Corps in the Civil Society Department with Sarah Buckley and others. So that started me down a path of working abroad and in DC on these issues, so thank you. Since that time, you've helped grow Mercy Corps' budget tremendously. So back to a couple questions ago on management, can you speak a little bit to the reasons for your success within the industry and kind of the growth opportunities you see moving forward?
I've been told this is the last question, and thank you for that. It's always hard to talk about the success of your own organization, because I'm always mindful that I think one of the biggest traits we can all have for success is humility, and I'm mindful to always want to project that. But I think in a very real way, if Mercy Corps has had success, it's been for a number of reasons. Number one, we've been able to attract an incredibly talented group of people, fortunately way smarter than me. And it's just been tremendous. Part of that has been being in Portland has enabled us to attract people who want to combine a real commitment to quality of life and investment in their own communities with making a difference abroad. Part of that is, I think, because we've tried to develop an entrepreneurial culture so that when people come in, we're empowering them to go out and think big and try to do great things. Part of it is, I think, our focus that is on those countries in transition, often called the fragile and failing states. That's been the sweet spot where so much global attention and resources have been directed. We've been willing to be in the Iraqs and the Afghanistans and the Sudans and the northern Ugandas and the Somalias of the world. And in a place like Somalia, when very few others are willing to go into there. But at the end of the day, I think if it really has come down to a real commitment to wanting to be among the leaders and to excellence, trying to get the culture of an organization right. Usually, if you get culture right, usually everything else kind of follows, and that's a culture that celebrates excellence and results, but also really celebrates caring as well. And as we tell people, you know, no one should get really rich doing this kind of work. That wouldn't be right. No one should have to be poor either doing this kind of work. So the most important thing you can do is come together, committed to a mission, trying to be a leader in that mission, and really creating an environment which you support and care about one another, so that at the end of the day, we hope that anyone who's been part of the organization will say, this is the best professional experience that I've had. And for me, I can say it has been, you know, working with some of the most amazing people here and around the world and in the communities that we serve has just been a blessing and grace. Thank you.
We have run out of time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. Join us in January for an all-star lineup when we'll be hearing from Secretary of State Kate Brown, State Economist Tom Potowski, and Oregon University Chancellor George Pernsteiner. As we close, please join me again in expressing our appreciation to today's guest, Neal Keny-Guyer, and let's wish he and Alyssa a happy 21st anniversary. We're adjourned.